Hello and welcome to Developing the Trust podcast. I'm Gary Pleece and I'm from Bear Creative, Warneford Consulting's marketing partner. And I've been working with Tim on his marketing for around 5 years now. And today we're turning the tables on Tim as I interview him about the forthcoming DFE publication of the outcome of the latest round of Condition Improvement Fund awards. So Tim, tell me, what is the Condition Improvement Fund?
Good morning, Gary. Hi. The Condition Improvement Fund, or CIF, as it's more commonly known, is a funding stream available to approximately 50% of the now 11,000 academy schools, which represents about 25% of the overall school population. So it has considerable impact. The fund seeks to address compliance and condition needs that are all too common across our aged built environment. The DFE apply a kind of hierarchy of need that reflects potential risk to life, injury, or possible school closure. Examples of funded compliance projects would include those that address things like fire safety, asbestos removal, gas or electrical safety, Legionella, safeguarding, all of the really high risk types of projects. And also projects that pose a risk to school closure. Examples of those would be things like heating and hot water systems. A broken boiler with no hot water and no heating means the school would not be able to open. Leaking roofs, all too common with climate change, etc. Flooding issues are on the rise, electrical upgrades, and many other sort of types of projects besides.
Okay, so what type of schools qualify for it?
So, as I said, need to be an academy school. And normally, if you've got less than 3,000 pupils on roll, and that number can be easy to reach if you're a secondary school and much harder to reach if you're a multi-academy trust of primary schools. I have a client in Devon with 17 primary schools, which still yet to reach the 3,000 school pupil threshold, so it's still CIF eligible. Each of these eligible schools are permitted to submit 2 bids per December each year. And traditionally, the DFE will evaluate those bids and publish the awards round about now in time for schools, consultants, contractors to mobilise to be able to deliver the projects over the summer months. Those schools not eligible for CIF, they receive formulaic funding in the form of school condition allocation, SCA, which provides a guaranteed capital income. So I have a client, again, a local client, a diocese with 13 schools, which receives £800,000 a year to be spread across all of their school estate. Whereas a CIF award can be significant. Last year's average CIF award was £440,000, and it's not uncommon for CIF awards per school, per bid, to be in excess of £1 million. So the stakes are high.
Oh, yeah, indeed. So why is securing the award so important to an eligible academy school?
As mentioned earlier, it is widely accepted that our 22,000 school estate, as a result of decades of underinvestment, is now in very poor condition. It's aged, unsafe, cold and damp. The only route available for these eligible schools to secure the vital capital funding is through CIF. And unsurprisingly, the competition is very fierce and high, and each year the fund is significantly oversubscribed. Each year, each December, the circa 5,000 eligible CIF schools submit around 4,000 applications, of which between 2015 and 2023, the average number of project awards was around 1,450. However, last year, 23-24, sorry, the number fell by around 25%, or 450, and only 1,033 such projects were funded due to the CIF pot not keeping up with double-digit inflation. The fear is that this year, 2024-25, the number of awarded CIF projects could drop even further, possibly as low as 900. And again, this will be as a direct result of a failure to invest significantly or sufficiently even into the CIF pot. If this proves the case, it would result in about 1,000 projects that in those previous 8 years would otherwise have been funded. And this at a time at the rate of dilapidation, buildings are considerably outpacing investment in them. We're not talking about nice to have cosmetic mugger pitches and things here. We're talking about serious non-compliance and again, posing a risk to life, injury and school closure.
So why is SIF so oversubscribed?
As mentioned, the stakes are so high now, and it is their only real form of capital funding. Each school receives something called the Devolved Formula Capital, or DFC, which is a very small and insufficient stipend that is supposed to stretch to repair and maintenance types works. But I have primary school clients who receive barely £4,000 a year, and that is supposed to cover their annual statutory requirements of various, fire risk assessments, water hygiene, Legionella tests, electrical and gas safety tests, let alone the running repairs that you'd expect in any school with, broken windows and broken doors. A SIF award removes the risk of life, injury and school closure for that particular work package. It helps transform that school environment, and it further assists with attracting and retaining staff, keeping up pupil numbers, providing a safe, warm and dry school that will basically provide a fit for purpose teaching and learning environment and give pupils the best opportunity to achieve their potential. I mean, nowadays, parents and pupils are more likely to select a school that is in good condition rather than one in poor condition, and that possibly that now acts as a bigger determinant than Ofsted ratings. It's that serious. And as I said, the stakes are really, really high. Each year, there are considerably more unsuccessful than successful bids, and the impact of a failed bid has on morale across the school cannot be underestimated.
So what are the options available for schools whose SIF bids are unsuccessful?
Well, once the school have picked themselves, up off the floor from the natural disappointment and frustration of not being successful, they should ideally review the scores and comments made by the SIF evaluators. The bids will come back, as I say, with scores and comments. They should then convene a meeting with their consultant who they've worked with to prepare and submit the bid and analyse where and why the submission fell short. My advice is that should be a frank and open discussion, where the consultant should be invited to give an account of any areas that the evaluators listed as reasons for the falling short of the expected standard and therefore not gaining the marks that they required. An appeal is possible, but it must be premised on a material error. So, for example, if the evaluator states that the bid would have secured higher marks had they produced a Gantt chart, and lo and behold, the Gantt chart is to be found in Appendix 4, that will be the grounds for an appeal. And the marks that could be accrued from that error from the evaluator may be sufficient to push that bid across the threshold. The number of appeals that are successful decreases each year, and frankly, it's more in hope than any expectation when you do lodge an appeal. There are other options. There is the urgent capital support route. This acts as an emergency safety valve for schools who face closure and who do not have the financial wherewithal to self-fund, and so is only viable for those schools with very limited reserves or who are already in deficit. Reviewing where the submission fell short and determining whether the fault lies with a poorly prepared bid that in another consultant's hands could still be successful in future rounds, or whether the bid in all reality was probably a non-runner in the first place and that the school may wish to review other options that may be stand more of a chance in future rounds. The competition between competing schools for the funding is such that only the most life expired and most urgent submissions are really now likely to be funded. It's an ugly contest and really is a race to the bottom.
So the big question is, what does the future look like for the education estate?
Well, I mean, as is widely accepted, the entire school estate is now in a parlous condition. The lack of historical investment has caught up with us. The National Audit Office on the condition of school buildings recently reported that over a third of school buildings are beyond their original design life. and that would have been premised on them being maintained adequately as well, which hasn't happened. That, you know, nearly 750,000 pupils are now taught in buildings which require major restructuring, refurbishing, rebuilding. The National Audit Office also recommended that to keep pace, an annual investment figure of £5.3 billion would be required. The Treasury only committed to 3.1 billion, and that 40% gap basically perfectly illustrates where we are today. You know, every time the DfE are challenged about the inadequate investment, they tend to fall back on the stock line that £15 billion has been invested in school buildings since 2015. But the reality of that statistic is that the figure should have been closer to 45 billion, and therefore there's a £30 billion gap. You know, it's worth noting that the school estate actually constitutes over 50% of the entire government portfolio, and yet only attracts 15% of that funding. So there's some serious gaps just about everywhere, really. And, you know, it's now estimated that, including the costs associated with the removal of RAC, the backlog funding chasm is now at least £15 billion. And when you add in additional costs to what it's going to be to decarbonise, to remove gas from our estate, the numbers have just become literally eye-watering. You know, in a general election year, we, the sector, had hopes that government would identify the value of education as a worthy battleground, especially after the political capital made by Labour since the RAC crisis broke last August. However, the recent withdrawing of funds and cuts to budgets, it feels very much the contrary, and it feels like we've been abandoned. My hope is that with a new Labour government, they will invest in the estate over the coming years and try to keep pace with the rate of dilapidation of our aged and life expired building stock. Light dawns gradually.
Thank you, Tim. We hope you found this 6 of the best podcast about the forthcoming SIF announcement and the school estate useful. Stay tuned for future podcasts with Tim back in the chair.